So welcome, my name is Avery Olah Reiken, and my project is the ever-changing world of journalism. I chose this topic because next year I will be studying journalism, broadcast journalism, hopefully with a concentration in sports, at Penn State University. It's also, not completely, but it's a continuation of my 20% project, which was researching the production of a newscast. I've always had interest in journalism and the news world, so when we were asked to find a project, this was a no-brainer. The reason I chose the ever-changing world of journalism, specifically with technology, is because I've noticed that over the years, technology has changed drastically with the increase in new technology, social media, iPhones, new computers, stuff like that. So I wanted to be able to talk with professionals and really ask them how it's affected their jobs and what they do. So, here's what I did over my project and what I learned. So the first day, I spent a day with Mr. Brad Skillman. Thank you for that contact, Ms. Myers. So it was really interesting. I was talking to him about news automation. Unfortunately, what we talked about is top secret, and I cannot share it with you tonight. But one thing that we did talk about that is public information is how much more accessible the news is now. He was telling me that when the Associated Press was formed in the 1850s, each news agency, including the Associated Press, would send out ships to the Atlantic Ocean to find the reporters coming from Europe to try and be the first ones with the news. Clearly, that does not happen anymore.
I want to go on a ship.
I'll do that.
Even in the 60s and 70s, everybody would wait till the 5 o'clock news to find out what happened. Now, for instance, when I was at Bloomberg, it was the day after the Egypt air crash, so 10 minutes after that plane went down, all our phones were buzzing and everybody knew about it. So that was a big thanks to technology. Another component of my project was writing with Ms. Dorso and editing for the Buzz newspaper. I really enjoyed this part because I wanted to make up for my mistake last year. During my TED Talk, I was like, I hate writing. And when I was looking to send my TED Talk to colleges, I was like, maybe I shouldn't. But this project and this year in general, I've really grown to like writing and really enjoy writing, and writing this paper really helped with that. I would sit here on Tuesdays and write from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and I remember the first day eating breakfast and thinking, wow, I'm going to edit one article, and then at 10 o'clock I'm going to have nothing to do. But then that day I was writing an article, and Ms. Dorso said, Avery, it's 3 o'clock, don't you have to leave? And I was like, oh yeah. So I really found that just like watching TV or going for a run or doing something for leisure, I found that writing, I really enjoyed writing, and I really got into the zone, and I really liked discovering and interviewing people and editing other people's pieces. I wanted to incorporate this into my project because years ago, the newspaper world was the presses, where you could stamp it with ink, and now they're typing and pasting and using Microsoft to format it, so there's new formatting for the newspapers, so it's definitely, thanks to technology, it has really increased. Even now, the newspaper's online, so yeah. Next, I spent a day at ABC in the TV3 studios with my cousin, Jace Reiken. We talked, his job is to support the control room with maintenance and any electronic problems they have, either with sound or visuals. That day, he was actually showing me that they're implementing a new program to edit the name bars that are under people during the newscasts. So yeah, and when I was talking to him about this, he said that one problem that they have is if manufacturers of the technology don't test it with the other technology they're already using, they then have to spend time that they could be using to just implement it and use it to make sure everything works, and then if it doesn't work, to fix it. I then had an interview with a woman by the name of Miss Angela Williams, and she's a producer for this online show, and she was talking to me about the importance of social media now, how if there's a story in Italy or Turkey, they don't, or Egypt on that day, so it was the same week as the Egypt air crash, they don't have to send a ship or wait for news to get back there. She can talk to someone on Facebook Live or Periscope or Instagram, and they can give her information that either quotes or just information that they don't have yet. Next, I interviewed a man named Andin Baltikov. He's a Hudson parent, and he's the Chief Operating Officer for Storyful. For those of you who don't know, Storyful is a website where they research and validate stories, and then they put them on this site called Newswire, where reporters can go to get valid information. Now, what I thought was really interesting is when I asked him the question, how has technology affected your job? And he said, it created it, because Storyful is completely online. So not only has technology changed many jobs, but it's also created it. He was telling me that before Storyful, he worked at CNN, and I asked him at that point, how did technology affect people's jobs? And he gave me the answer that many people gave me. It's that people, and reporters especially, had to get used to a new way of reporting and getting information. Now there's less need, well, not less need, but there's more of a need for reporters to be able to video and take photos, not just write and somebody else edit. So now everyone has to do everything. But also, just like with my cousin implementing the new technology at ABC, you still have to take time out of your job to learn how to use the new technology. Finally, I spent another day at ABC, but instead of in the TV section, in the advertising department, with a woman by the name of Miss Amy Porter. And I talked with a bunch of her colleagues. One of them was talking to me about when they try and sell ads, when they try and get companies like Coca-Cola or Walmart to buy ads to put in the space, it's a lot easier for live television, or not live television, prime time. So if you're watching Modern Family, they know there's going to be a commercial at the 8-minute mark, and they can book it. But with apps like Watch ABC or online ABC, they don't know when people are going to use it, so they can't. It's harder to figure out when those ads are going to go and when to tell the companies this is when your ad's going to run, because it's all dependent on the viewer. So I mentioned that they go to these big companies and they sell it, and I think a really interesting thing is that they're the national. I asked because if you see a commercial for, just say, Napoli's or Grimaldi's, I was wondering how does that affect it, and it's actually two different departments working together. So there's the ABC 7 working with the National to try and figure out when these big companies who are paying lots of money are going, and when the tinier mom and pop shops are going to have their ads. So one thing I found very interesting that I had not thought about before is that certain companies, primarily the more conservative or family-oriented companies, they don't want their ads shown on certain shows. For instance, How to Get Away with Murder, a show based on murders and homicide. Some family-oriented companies, for instance, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but just say, I don't know, just say Verizon had an ad that they were trying to appeal to parents to buy phones for their small children. They're not going to show it on How to Get Away with Murder because kids aren't going to be there watching it. A few other shows that they do that for is The Bachelorette, because sometimes it's a little risque, so they don't want their ads being associated with those shows. One big takeaway I took from my day at ABC is that although we don't think about it, the ad business is so crucial and so interconnected with the TV business, because I think personally, and I'm sure most of you, take it for granted that, oh, I'm going to watch my show and then there's going to be an ad for Toyota and there's going to be a guy driving a car. But no one thinks, until now for me and hopefully for you guys, nobody thinks that for months and months they've been planning and selling ads and selling TV space so that Toyota gets that ad and makes sure that people see their product. So what did I learn about myself in life? First of all, professionals are approachable. I've been finding this more and more useful as I've been studying journalism further, that although person A has done these great things and they work in a high office and they're busy, they still want to help and they still have interest in helping people who are like them, who are aspiring, and who want their advice. Another thing is that technology does not always work in your favor. although my whole project was about how technology is changing journalism, I intended to write a blog about each of my experiences and the takeaways, but the website wasn't working the way I wanted it to, and at a certain point I just had to decide that it wasn't worth it to keep fighting with the website, but I had to move on and find a solution. So instead of posting my different entries, I just wrote them. I wrote 2 to 3 page essays about each interview and some of the big takeaways, and of course the newspaper articles. And so I just printed them, and so I have a few copies I can give you guys later if you guys are interested. But although I wasn't able to display it on a bigger format online, I still found it useful to write and really recall what happened, and I found it helpful for really learning the information, because it's a lot easier when you record someone and you interview someone, but then when you have to write about what you learned, it really re-solidifies it. Third thing is to always bring a backup pen. I brought some pens, but I left them all in one office, and I had one pen when I did 2 of my interviews, and it popped, the spring popped, and the pushy thing went flying. So it's really hard to keep doing an interview when you're rescrewing the pen. So always bring a backup pen, because TD Bank pens are not always reliable. I would like to thank everybody who helped me with this project, especially Ms. Dorso, my mentor, who helped me with writing the newspaper, but also editing my entries. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Thank you.
Yes, Avery, first of all, it is so wonderful to hear about your writing and editing and how much you love it now. It's a life skill and it's fabulous. However, these places that you went and discussed things with and that you interned at or almost interned at, right?
Yeah.
They're all businesses, and they
Right.
have to have a business model and they have to monetize for the future, okay? We all know, as much as we might love the written side of journalism,
Right.
that's kind of dead, right? Companies are giving content away, they're struggling to find a business model. If you're privy to saying, when you look into the future, which of those, what have you learned about companies that are going to be real survivors versus companies that may not make it? And maybe as an addendum to that question, how do you think sports might work in the future?
Well, I have 2 comments about that, because one, I thought about that, and I was actually surprised to learn when I interviewed a lot of these people that although many of them did make the same comment that they would have never been able to imagine where journalism is now, so they can't even imagine where it's going to go in the future, many of them still said that the same idea of taking down notes and writing and posting online is still, and printing news, maybe not printing newspapers, but publishing newspapers online is still going to be there in many years. But I do see what you're saying. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. As far as sports are concerned, I think one big thing that sports has going for it is that there's always coverage on it. There's always play-by-play announcers, which is personally what I want to do. There's always people covering the Super Bowl. There's never a sporting event, at least at the professional level, that's not covered. For instance, like, whereas in the news, a crime scene, there's not going to be reporters like commentating on play-by-play, so you have to wait for the news. So I think sports is very different than news, because sports is always going to be covered, where news has to be an accumulation, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Vinson?
With the increasing pace of information, how quickly stories, travel, for lack of a better word, and the pressure on companies to be the first to publish or present. I'm just curious, did anyone ever talk about fact-checking?
Yes. So Storyful, that was a big thing, that they want to make sure that all of their stories on the newswire are valid and true. It was interesting though, because a lot of people also mentioned that they want to have programs that can fact check, where right now you have to have a person there making sure, like the computer can give you certain information or point you to a website, but both at Storyful and Bloomberg and at ABC, it was all about that there has to be that other person who still reads over it, and in the future they don't want that. They want the computer to be able to fact check. Does that make sense?
It does. So do you think, so I'll follow up, do you think that that's beneficial to the viewer or reader, or do you think it's better to have a human being?
I think if someone can program the technology, it would be beneficial because, what?
Josh.
Yes.
Forever and ever. Josh and Avery.
So I think it would be beneficial both to the company if they can get a computer, because the one major thing at all four of the companies I talked with is that they want to be first and they want to be out there. So if they can get a computer that 99% of the time the facts are right, I mean, obviously there's going to be errors, but there's going to be errors from humans too. I don't know if you guys remember, after the Boston bombing, on the Wednesday of the manhunt, CNN released that they had both men had been captured, when in fact that was not the case, and they actually had no clue where they were. So I think although there's always going to be mistakes, I think both companies and humans would like it if there was, maybe humans wouldn't care if it's a human or a computer, but they just want to get the news first, and so that.
So, let's see.
Mr. Olah.
Thanks. So it's interesting what you said, because I thought about the Boston bombing thing. You talked about how it used to be you just wait and people would gather news and whatever time they could, and it just presented at 5 o'clock or at 6 o'clock, and that's all you got. Now, because there's like round-the-clock news and stations like CNN and all, something will happen like the Boston bombing where they're trying to find the guy, and all of a sudden, it's like the opposite. It's like they are play-by-play. You have these news reports where hour after hour, someone's just sitting outside, like acting like something's really happening when nothing's happened in like 3 hours, and looking like they're waiting to announce it, and just clearly looking like they're filling up air like we did before the first bombing, right? So I don't know if anyone, it's just a comment I was thinking, but I don't know if anyone else thought about that, like the kind of the challenge of having to fill up a website and podcasts and all this other thing.
Well, that was one thing I talked about at ABC, is that I asked them if there's ever challenges to fill up airspace, and they said in the live shows and the big shows like the Oscars or the Super Bowl, even though ABC doesn't cover the Super Bowl, there's never a problem because everyone wants their ad displayed at the Super Bowl or at the Oscars. They said sometimes that advertisers will retract their offer if they know, oh, just say on this episode there's like a lot of blood or someone dies or something that they don't really want to be associated with. But usually they're pretty good with filling space, because a lot of companies want to be on that spot. So if one backs down, others are usually eager to jump in that spot. Ms. Chandler?
That's great. Did they, at any of the sort of places you went to, did they talk about freelance journalists versus contract journalists, and is there a trend moving? I know I've heard this in my industry that the mobile revolution is going to be so much more bigger than the digital revolution in terms of photography. And I was thinking about photojournalists. Are most of them independent contractors? Are they contracted to the organizations? How does it kind of work now?
Well, most of the people I talked with worked for ABC or Bloomberg. They were an individual. I want to be able to answer your question, but I don't really know that much about the difference between individual contractors and company workers.
But I think it's a moving target, like you said, because the person who did Playful, he began a whole new business based on that, right? So
and same with Storyful, is that their own
Storyful,
yeah. Oh, with Storyful is that it's owned by News Corp. So yeah, I see what you're saying, that someone from News Corp picked it up, but I don't know that much about it. I'm sorry, Ms. Ray.
Were they worried at all about the difference between presenting what happened and presenting why it happened? It seems like news is more focused now on getting out what happened really quickly, but not analyzing the situation as much.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up, because when I talked with people, they said that computers and people who are just skimming, they can easily take from a piece what happened. For instance, Sports Authority closing. Sports Authority closing, this is what happened, but they want to be able, one thing is that they talked about is wanting to be able to analyze trends. So just say a bunch of McDonald's close and you see that, oh, it's because there's been a lot of bad, there's been a lot of robberies in that area, so people don't want to go in that area. So then, now in, just say California, a bunch of McDonald's closed, you see, oh, was there a lot of robberies or stuff like that, yeah. So analyzing trends is important.